So in this video, I want to talk about the most common mistake that I see in my students' work. And it's really, this is for students especially who have attempted to paint or have been trying to paint for a long time, even for first-time painters, really. But it's the last sort of hurdle that I see, and the thing that divides, pretty good realism from great realism. And I see it over and over again. And I'm going to try to explain to you exactly what that is. But before I do, let me give you the context of where I'm coming from. I teach private classes here in Austin, and I teach students who have never painted before, and I teach students who have been painting for 20 years. And yet I still see this mistake consistently in their work. But the real, before I even get to telling those students about this problem that I'm going to talk about, they have to at least have the fundamentals, down. They need to know how to mix color. They need to basically know how to draw in proportion, and they need to know how to, lay their color on the canvas properly. And that's a workflow that I teach. It's very much a teaching method. So my way of teaching is not necessarily the way that you would paint the rest of your life. I don't even encourage my students to continue to use my method, past, say, 10 or 20 paintings or whatever it is. I encourage my students to make my method their own. But before they even get there, if anybody comes to and takes a class from me, whether there's somebody just starting out or somebody that's been painting 20 years, I tell them the only thing I can offer you as a student, as a teacher, the only thing I can offer you to teach you is a workflow. And what I mean by that is, if you can imagine almost like a flow chart or a step-by-step process for how you go about drawing in proportion, or how you go about mixing your colors, or how even you go about putting your paint on the canvas. And whenever I see a problem in my students' work, I try to make a habit, and I think I pretty much do this, although there are times when I'm sure I haven't done this. But what I really try to do as a teacher is to never give them direct advice. I don't come around the corner when they're painting and say, the angle on the nose is wrong, or your color's wrong in the forehead. It doesn't do them any good. Maybe a little bit of good if pointing out mistakes. But when they get home, that's not really going to help them. So I come around the corner and I've got a student who's just painted a vase, and then there's a glow down in the shadow, and they've painted their glow way too bright. So I don't say your glow is way too bright. What I say is, why didn't you check your colors? And then sure enough, if they're working from life and they hold out their color checker and they hold it over the glow, they can clearly see that the glow is that the paint on their color checker is far brighter than the glow in the vase. And so that's a simple break in the workflow. They did not check their color. They made assumptions. So those are the things that are fundamental to doing, at least trying to do my method. And I always encourage people to do my method by the letter. And when I get students here, I tell them, there's nothing that I'm going to teach you in this class that isn't available in my videos. I'm sure I'll say some things that you can't find in my videos. But basically, there's no secrets that I teach in my private workshops that I don't make available on my YouTube videos. I try to tell you guys everything. I don't hold back on what I teach. So the benefit of taking my private class is, and what I tell them, and this is what I'm telling you who don't have the benefit of taking my class, so you hear the same message. But what I tell them is, I say, if you take my class, I can identify those 2, 3, 5, 6 things that you're doing that are critical mistakes. But every one of those critical mistakes, and this is what I'm telling you that are watching my videos and aren't able to take my class, every one of those mistakes is in my videos, or it's in my, if you go to my drawmixpaint.com and you go to the full course, it's all available, it's all there for free, and everything's explained in detail. There's no secrets so if you do this workflow and you follow it to the letter, then what I guarantee my students or anybody who's trying my method is that it'll work and you will succeed at it. And if you fail, I should be able to point to something in the workflow that you missed. So you don't, or that you're doing wrong, or you're taking a shortcut and skipping something, or whatever it is. But so anybody can go in there and look at the online course and go through every bit of it and know exactly how to do it. But furthermore, and then let me get to this problem that I see, the number one problem that nobody seems to ever, and it's ultimately it's a color checking problem. But even so, and this is, after my students have taken my class and they've succeeded in my class, and then they go home and I can look at their work a year later and they've evolved into this mistake. And this mistake it's kind of hard to explain, but it's when you look at your painting and you look at your source, what amateurs tend to do, and this mistake that I see over and over again, is that everything gets exaggerated. And let me be real specific what I mean by that. Let's say that you're painting a line in somebody's forehead, a wrinkle in somebody's forehead. Well, the mistake that I see over and over again is that people will always paint that wrinkle in the forehead and make it more visible. It's not as subtle. If you look at the source, and if I point it out to my students, they see it. It's not that you can't see it. It's just that you never think to ask the question, which one is more subtle? And what I even tell my students in my workshops, I try to remember to tell everybody, is I'd say get an index card and a Sharpie marker and write this down and put a thumbtack through it and stick it on your studio wall, because it's maybe one of my biggest frustrations with my students, and I see how their work develops after they leave my class. And that is, let me give you some more examples of this, which is more subtle question. So now you've put in your, painted it, covered your canvas, you finished your, your still life basically, you've worked on all your problems, and now you say, now let's ask the question, which one is more subtle? So if I look at the glow in the shadow and I say, does your glow stand out more in your painting than it does in your source? And if the answer is yes, then you have to bring it down and make it just as subtle, just as dark, or whatever it takes as it is in your source, so that the glow in your vase does not stand out more, so that it's just as subtle as the glow in your source. And here's the thing, is that the way our brains, it's really a crazy thing, but when you have your critical brain working, when you're sitting there and you're analyzing your painting and you're trying to decide what's wrong, you tend to like the exaggeration. When you see a glow, you enjoy, you like it even more in your painting when you look at it, in isolation, and you say, I like the glow, I like the brighter glow. And so don't, and that's the mistake, because it's the subtlety, it's getting that subtlety that really takes your work to that highest level. Let me give you some other examples of subtlety. If you paint in a nose, a lot of times the line on the nose on one side or the other will be almost lost, or even lost completely, where you can't even delineate between this edge of the nostril and the cheek, or whatever it is. And you can see that a lot. Well, it should be, and this gets into losing the line. If you lose a line, then you should lose the line. And this goes back to this tendency, or this desire to want to paint everything, to want to be able to see everything. So even if you paint a little, silver cup sitting on a dark tablecloth, and that edge, as it goes around, it completely is lost. You can't even see the edge of the cup as it disappears into the shadow. And if you lose that line in your source, then you better lose it in your painting, because that's the subtlety thing again. You should not be able to see anything. Things shouldn't have more pop. Patterns shouldn't be more visible. Maybe one of the most common times that I see this is, let's say you've got a tablecloth or a cloth over a piece of wood that you're setting your still life on, and there's a fold in that cloth running across the surface. And a lot of times that fold in that little fold in the cloth can be so subtle, it's almost not visible. But in not everyone, but almost every one of my students' work, if they're going to paint that fold, they're going to make it stronger. They're going to make it more visible. So when you're finished with your painting, you really need to just go and just look at every part of it and ask that question, which one is more subtle? And what I mean by that is, which is more subtle? The thing in my painting, whether it's a shine or a line or whatever it is, or is it more visible in the source? And it almost always, you tend to overpaint it, you tend to overdefine it, you tend to make it more visible. And it's because while you're working on it, you love it. You love to see it. You love to see the lines and to see the patterns and to look into it and see it. But it should be just as subtle. Okay, I've said it enough, but I hope you'll take it to heart and, write it on an index card with a Sharpie and put a thumbtack and put it up in your studio so you'll never forget to think about that when you're finished with your painting. So I hope that's helpful. And remember, also, it's always about learning the workflow first, and it's not that you're going to ever really understand, or the way that you learn to understand color and to have an instinct for color and to have a feel for it and to learn to draw is by doing the workflow. And then doing the workflow and following those steps, that's what teaches you. You mix colors enough and pretty soon you start to see it. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.